The word is a little bit tough to say. The word is Pacaya. Pacaya. Now you got to get the end. Pacaya. Let me hear it. Pacaya. Now, Ashley, I want to hear you say it. All right. Can you do this, Abby? Come on. Pacaya. Luke? Okay. Pacaya is the word. It's the word for, it actually comes up in Exodus 23 in verse 8. God says, I don't want you to take a bribe because it blinds your pacaya. Pacaya is the word for a focus, an ability to see through things with clarity. Now let me tell you why that word is going to be important to you. There are only two words that are, well, not only, but there are two primary words in Latin that are translated work, the work of your hands. One of them is laborare, from which we get the word labor, okay? And it means to do or to work. The other one is a word that in the 18th century became very important. Using an old Latin term, it became important because musicians picked it up. And it's a translation of the word poema from Greek, and it's the word opus. And the difference between the labor and the opus was clarity. If you're the person who goes out and labors, you can work very hard through your life, but never see its meaning. If you're the person who designs or builds your life around the clarity of an opus to present to the Lord, then you become purposeful in your energy. And many, many people I know in life are incredibly covered with laborare, to work, but they don't know why they're doing it. In fact, most people don't know why they're doing it. Most people get up in the morning, go to a job. They do it. Then they come home. Then they get either go out or get a meal. And then they watch television, 3, 4, 5 shows. They don't even remember what the plot was the next morning. They get up and do it all again. And that's their life. And in 20 or 30 years, they stop and think, is this what it is? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? The clarity, the pekach of a person who is able to see that your life is knit together, your relationships are knit together, your opportunities are knit together to build an opus that has lots of little sub-themes going on. It's one piece, but it's lots of little pieces. You'll have relationships with people this year, and you may drop out of that relationship for 5 years and find them on Facebook or whatever the 5 years from now will be the thing. And people will come back and they will connect and reconnect, and your life will go around in various circles. You were listening to my friends share with you how God directed them through the slalom course that is life. What looks like a detour, God calls the plan, okay? And so often you're running around and you're thinking, what is going on? I want to show you a guy who tells you about his journey. I want to do it between now and noon, and I want to do it in a way that I hope will capture you. We're going to do two things. I'm going to start in 1 Kings 6 and then jump to the book of Ecclesiastes. I want to give you a diary. The diary of a man who discovered an opus. The diary of a man who went from labor to opus, who understood at the end. Look, there are questions that you're born with. One of them is, who am I? Or whose am I, which defines who am I. Why am I here? Where am I going? And those inborn questions that are a part of your life, people try to answer in different ways. Some of them go to Stuff Mart and they try to stuff their life with stuff, and that's how they try to answer the question. A believer starts and says, whose am I defines who am I. And because I belong to him, now I understand that the origin of life was in him, the purpose of life is for him, and the destiny of life is to him. Okay? That's where we're going. Let me show you something. It's one of these passages that when you first look at it in the Bible, you go, yeah, well, that was great. Let's move on. It's one of those ones you can almost sleep through in your devotions. It's a pivotal passage in the Bible. Trust me on this. You're not going to see it right away, but it will become one. Go to 1 Kings chapter 6 for a minute. I want you to see something that the first 20 times I read through it, I passed right over it. And I didn't really understand what the Pacaya was. And I want you to see in verses 1 to 10, right alongside verses 1 to 10, detail of the temple. This is detail. And you don't have to, memorize all the details. I'm not asking you how many chambers or rooms. Let me just quickly skip a stone across the top with verse 1 gives the timing statement. This is when it happened. Why is 6:1 important to you? You have seen this verse before.
Because it gives us a date, and so we can figure out dates being
Right. It is a date hinge. We know the Exodus date of 1446 because of this date. Because this is a date we know. So we start with when King Solomon is, and then we say it's the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, and we know that this year that's happening right then is 966, and so we go backwards and we can get 1446. That's how we get the dating system of what we know. So the timing is important. But the second verse isn't about timing, it's really about size. It's about the length and the width and the height of the temple. Now, what's a cubit? Show me a cubit. Good. This is a cubit. So it's essentially from the tip of the fingers to the bottom of the... Now, the difficulty with this is if you have 20 guys building, their cubits are not all the same, and this came to be a problem later. Okay? But, well, look, we get our measurement of the foot from King Charlemagne, 800, whose foot was 12 inches, and that's how we get a foot. So, I mean, everything was measured by body parts originally, and in the Bible, it's finger breadths, it's hand breadths, and it's cubits, and that's how they did it. Now, here's what's important. You've got timing in verse 1, then size, then design in verses 3 and 4. 3 and 4 tell you how they built it, what the porches look like, what the artistic frames and windows look like. So the design elements. I'm not doing anything spiritually with it. I'm not trying to spiritualize the passage. I'm just telling you that's what it is. Then you get to verses 5 and 6, and it spends 2 verses on side chambers, the side chambers, what's on either side. And essentially it's because they had a certain kind of limitation on the building materials that they built out of stone and wood beams, so they needed side buildings to build it to hold it up like a buttress on the outside so the outside didn't fall down. There weren't high rises in antiquity because they didn't know how to build the foundation so that the tops didn't fall down. When they finally made high rises, by the 1st century, you have high rises, but it's basically 2 floors of stone and then 6 floors of tenement housing in places like Ostia Antica or Rome, and those are all built out of wood. And the problem is, if you're on the 8th floor of a high-rise that's entirely built out of wood and everybody has a wooden brazier to keep warm, the place burns down and you die because you're way up top. That's just the way it is. So it's not a thing. People don't want to live in a skyscraper. Skyscraper means you're desperately poor and have to carry your chamber pot. That's really what it means. All right, so now what we have are the side chambers. Now in verse 7, we have how they prepped stone. This is stone prep. That's what it is. It's all about how the stone preparations were made. So this house, while it was being built, was built of stone, prepared at the quarry, off-site. In other words, this is a prefab house. So expect the stone that's being used in it to be not only prepared off-site, but probably numbered or scarred in such a way as they know how it fits together. In some archaeological settings, we find prepared stone from off-site, and it's great. If you get stones from off-site where they're already numbered, but now they're scattered, you can put it back together. In this case, we don't have these, but because they're destroyed, again, by the Babylonians. But we get a little bit of stone preparation. Then we get something about the doors in verse 8. Tells you how the doorway works. And in verses 9 and 10, all the finish work. Now, if you're building a house, you happen to know that verses 9 and 10 are incredibly important. For some of you, you could care less about how the beams in your house look, but you care about how the trim looks. This is where the color is added. This is where the trim is added. So when you're building, this is the cool part of the program, you know? You know, when they're doing the plumbing and the electrical, which they didn't do here, but when they're doing that on your house, that's not, you know, there's nothing really sexy about plumbing and electrical. You're like, oh, my wires go this way. Oh, yeah, but mine go this way. You know, who cares? But when you get the coverings and the finish coats, that's where you get the lacquer cabinets and all the spice, right? So that's this part. Now, When you get all the way down to verse 10, I want you to skip 11 to 14 for right now. We're coming back to it because that's where we're going. But I want you to go to 15 now. Jump to 15. And from 15 to 38, this is the detail of the completion. The detail of the completion. So the detail of the framing is the beginning. This is the detail of the completion. And it will take you through the cypress that's used and the cedar that's used. I want you to drop your eyes to 6:17, because 6:17 will give you the size of the holy place. Remember, the holy place consists of both the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And the detail work in 18 through 20 of the Holy of Holies. And exactly what it looked like inside the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. And finally, when you get down, you'll see, for instance, in 21 and 22, some gold panels. And then you'll see in 23 to 28, the cherubim. I probably would circle the word cherubim so that you know that they're active not only in the tabernacle, but they're carried over in Solomon's temple. Remember, God gave in Exodus 25 to 40 how to build the tabernacle. God never told them any instructions that we know of as to how to build this. So this comes from memories of the tabernacle and design structures of the common day. So expect it to have some Egyptian influences, expect it to have the latest and greatest things that were available to Solomon. Remember, he's got a lot of out-of-town visitors, so he's got a lot of people to consult, to talk to as to how different buildings are built. I'm going somewhere with this, so hang in there. Well, after that, 29 to 36 gives you details of the doors and the lintels and the columns. And then finally, I want you to get down to 37 and 38, because this is the timing of the completion. This is how we know what the completion was all about. It says, in the 4th year of the foundation, the house of the Lord was laid in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished throughout all its parts and according to all of its plans. That means it took how many years to build? If it started in the 4th year and ended in 11th, please help David feel good about you. 7 years. So it'll take him 7 years to build the temple. Now, don't make any hay out of the fact that it'll take him 13 years to build his house later. Don't make it like, because I've heard people say, well, and that showed he had greater priority on his house than the temple. No, it showed that he had to do all the work from scratch on his house, and the temple was already partially underway by the time David had pulled together a lot of the needs for it. So David dies with a lot of the things already beginning. Okay? When Solomon steps in, he gives it its design, and he pulls it together because David was not allowed because of the blood on his hands. All right, I skipped a part of this passage. This is the part I want you to know. Right in the middle of the passage, between the accounting of framing and the accounting of the flooring and finish work, there's the underlying conditions upon which God would establish the house of David and the point of the whole thing. And that's 11 to 14. I want you to put a box around 11 to 14. And then I want to carefully, slowly look at 11 to 14, and then we're going to jump to the diary of the man who God told this to. Okay? In 11 to 14, it says in verse 11, now the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, so clearly, all of this will be God to Solomon, and it's in the context of building this worship place, so it's going to be about that. It's going to be, as you're working with your life work, the thing you're going to be remembered by, this massive thing that's going to be, people are going to come for generations. They're going to call it Solomon's temple. It's not Solomon's temple. It's God's temple. But that's how we work. People tag the ministry on the human God uses, not the God who built it. Real ministry doesn't happen because of us. Real ministry happens because we showed up and God did what God did. Okay? So let's keep our focus there. This is, how am I going to use the opus of your life? How am I going to do it? So if you drop into verse 12, it starts an incredible thing. It says, concerning this house which you're building. Now, concerning this mark of ministry that you're leaving, concerning this great work that you feel called to by me that is going to be left behind when you're gone. Okay? Notice he says, I want to tell you some things about it. He says, if you will walk, that's the word holech, it means to make your walk about, or make the life path about. If you will walk in my statutes. Do you remember the word chugim, the word chuk? It's the word for engravings. This is the word for eternal principles. If you will walk in my statutes. Stop right there. He says, if you stay consistent with my unchanging principles. That's the first part. Then he says, and you execute my ordinances. If you follow through on the word ordinances is mishpatim. You remember the difference between chugim and mishpatim? Chugim are eternal principles engraved in stone that when God says it, it will always be true. Mishpatim is judgments. What's the difference in judgments? Does anybody remember from the Torah what mishpatim is? Mishpat is like judge, like a court. Like Dan is a judge, mishpat is like a court. Mishpatim, judgments. Okay, that's it. See, chugim are eternal things that God has given as principles, but mishpatim are when I blow those, here's the way back out. So God gave not only eternal principles, he also gave repair statements of how to fix when you've blown the first one, because you will blow the first one, and he knows it, and so do you. Okay? So I think there's something incredibly redemptive about mishpatim. It's like, thus says the Lord, do not do this. By the way, you're going to, and when you do, then do this. Okay? This is how you fix it. That's a mishpatim. So he says, if you will execute my mishpatim, go back and when you do wrong, fix what I gave you. See, the first one is, if you stay consistent with my unchanging principles, but the second one's different. He's not echoing the first one. He's saying, if you go back when you do wrong and fix it. Solomon, I'm not calling on you to be perfect. I'm telling you these are my eternal truths, and then I'm telling you when you don't do them, this is what to do next. But if you will both do this, and like your father David, who messed up, other than being an adulterer and murderer, he was a good guy, this is the way you fix it. And then he goes on to a third one. He says, and keep my commandments by walking in them. If you will keep all my commandments by walking in them. The word keep is shomer. It's the word for guard. It's not just you'll do them. If you will guard my commandments, my mitzvot. Part of mitzvot is prescribed good behaviors. If you will guard prescribing good behavior, that is defining good as good. By walking in them, that is by modeling it, not just by saying it. The best way you can prove to a generation what a good marriage is have one. The best way you can prove what a morally straight Bible student is to walk in a morally straight way. You can preach all you want. People are watching. So here's the bottom line. He says, if you will guard the good and caring behaviors that I called you to live by, then, and look for the then, circle the then. It's right in the middle of verse 12. So it's if, then. This is one of those classic geometry things, right? If, then, okay? Now what's the then? Then I will carry out, this is the word kum, it means to rise up. If you come to our house and you get tea, we heat up our hot water in a kum. Rise up. Okay? It's a Hebrew word for then I will rise up to the word promises is actually, devar is actually the word speeches. I will rise up to the speeches I made to David. David listened to my word because I gave him these long speeches. I'm going to rise up and accomplish each one of those. All of my promised responsibilities towards you. But there's another one. Then I will dwell among the sons of Israel and will not forsake my people Israel. I want you to look at that for a second. The word dwell is the word shokan. It's the word for tent. Mishkan is the tabernacle. It's interesting because he mentions the same relational word in view of building the temple. Then I will shokan. I will tent with you among my sons Israel. I'll make my lodging with you. But the interesting thing is, he says, then I will not forsake. The word ozav is I will not release or abandon. This is a covenant term for a marriage. So he says, I will cover you like in a covenant. I will tent among you and I won't let you wander. Now, here's the Pacaya, here's the clarity of the whole thing. Rooted in God's answer is his underlying purpose. I don't want you to miss this. Immature believers stop at obedience, followed by repentance, and they forget the purpose. The end point of this, the end point is verse 13. I want you to put next to the verse 13 that the end point, the clarity point for Solomon is intimacy. So he says, I want you to be obedient. I want you to be repentant. I want you to be guardians of the truth and modelers. But that's not the point of your life. The point of your life is that you walk with me. And Mike came to the same conclusion. His conclusion of his talk was the same thing. It's this whole adventure of doing it with God. Guys, if I teach you to be obedient, that's one thing. If I teach you to be repentant when you're not obedient, that's another thing. If I teach you to be guardians on Facebook of every right post before God, that's another thing. And you can do all those things and be an immature Christian because you missed the point. Solomon, this big, beautiful building that I've given you, it's about one thing. It's about me dwelling with you. It's about me spending time with you and doing it in relationship. The reason these verses are critical is because it defines the journey that Solomon went on throughout his life. The truth of the matter is, you're never going to reach maturity as a believer alone. Maturity means intimacy with God. It means I'm walking holding his hand. It means a marriage. It means a covenant. It means a connection. It means a togetherness with God. And if you're going to be obedient to God and know his word and not do that, then you are going to be one of those ugly egghead Christians. You're going to be one of those Star Trek figures with the big heads that talk like this. We got a lot of those. They know their prophecy charts. They can memorize the scripture. They can shoot off all the answers, and they're killing people. And they're driving them away from Jesus Christ. The single greatest thing you could do for the gospel is walk with God. That sounds right, doesn't it? It sounds like, yeah, if I walk with God, then other people will see. So here's your profound day. Now, how did Solomon take that word? Well, he did just like Randy. He heard it, and most of his life he didn't do it. But let's be encouraged by his hard-headedness, okay? Because it's going to be reflective of some of us.